What's happening, movie freaks? This is James Hancock from Wrong Reel. It's episode 159, and I'm here with Dave Eves to discuss the great Jacques Tati. And once again, this is an episode that you pitched, so thanks for pitching yet another really, really cool topic for the podcast. And welcome back to the
Thank
show.
you for having me once again.
Yeah, we've done, The Conjuring 2, we did Giallo, we're doing this, and
This is the first non-horror thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so used to talking about just the most horrific shit imaginable with you, so it's going to be an interesting change of pace talking about a filmmaker as distinctive and unusual as Jacques Tati, who I should say from the outset, I was a total, complete blank slate on him until earlier this week, and I saw his four main films, and I've read a little bit, but I don't want anyone to think that I am like under the illusion I'm some sort of Jacques Tati connoisseur or expert. I am very much a neophyte. I'm new to the game. So for this episode, Dave will be the expert on the topic.
I'm happy. If I could say that I'm an expert in anything, I'm happy to at least pretend to be an expert in Jacques Tati.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to tell everybody that you've been teaching classes on him over in Paris and things like that.
You know what? I'll back up that lie.
Stuff.
I will back that up.
Excellent.
I'll Photoshop pictures of myself in Paris. Whatever it takes.
Beautiful. This has been kind of a crazy week because I've been preparing for, usually on any given week, I have some episodes that are about a new movie, which is, see the movie, do the episode, and I have some episodes which are basically a filmmaker's filmography. But due to strange timing this week, I was preparing three kind of filmography episodes at the same time. One on Peter Bogdanovich, which is already posted, one on Jacques Tati, and one I'm doing tomorrow on Joe Dante. And all of a sudden I realized, I was like, are there enough hours in the week to just physically sit through enough movies from all three directors to be ready to go? And I started kind of having to do the math, like how many movies can actually squeeze into individual days while still actually sleeping and eating and going to the bathroom and that sort of thing. So I appreciate your willingness to condense this into four of his films instead of all six, because I needed those other 4 hours for preparing for Bogdanovich and Joe Dante.
I know. I can't believe that you're doing so many of those. I'm glad that I pitched a lighter director in that sense then.
Yeah, his output is amazing, but definitely he's not a Michael Curtiz type character who has 150 films, or a Raoul Walsh or something like that.
No.
Like, if I ever tried to do a filmography of Raoul Walsh, I think it would take just a month of just all day, every day, just watching his movies. But yeah, this old school guy's definitely cranked him out.
Yeah, well, but then you see Jacques Tati, who at his most productive period did 2 films in a decade.
Yeah,
he took his time.
Well, for people who have not heard our previous episodes, tell the good folks on the internet a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and how you got into flicks and all that good stuff.
All right, so I am I guess you could say, independent short filmmaker who lives in the Philadelphia area. I've been watching movies forever. I went to Drexel University to study film, and that's kind of where a lot of my love of European cinema came in. Before that, my real exposure to foreign film was mostly with Japanese cinema. So in Drexel, that's when I kind of found European cinema, especially French film, and tying that into this whole topic. When I found Jacques Tati a few years ago, it was these movies that I couldn't believe I had never seen before. It's like kind of finding this person out there that I could connect with almost immediately through his films. It's something that just clicked instantly, made total sense, and they've been some of my favorite movies ever since.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of a sad story about how financially toward the end of his life, he really fell in hard times and had to surrender the rights to all of his movies.
Yeah.
But at least Criterion is very lovingly restored and maintained and kind of curated his work so that future generations can discover him. Because I know for a long time, these films were only available on VHS. And seeing these movies on pan and scan, crummy VHS qualities would be a huge disservice to his movies, because most comedies, the visuals are almost immaterial. But with him, his style, it's essential. I mean, the gags, more often than not, it's like all these long shots and these perfectly composed frames. And without the full frame, he shot fucking Playtime in 70 millimeter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So the visuals are essential. So thankfully, some of these films have been re-released in theaters where they should be seen. I sadly have not seen one in the theater yet.
I would love to see Playtime in 70 millimeter.
Playtime in 70 millimeter would be a rare, special, wonderful experience.
Yes.
But yeah, but if to people who are curious about his stuff, Hulu has at least 4 of his movies online now. But what was his first feature and what was his last feature? What are kind of like the bookends of his career?
The first and last one. The first one's Jour de Fête. I actually rewatched that one just this morning. That is not starring his character, Mr. Hulot, who is his most well-known character. That is the French translation is the day of the fair, I believe it is. I'm not a French major at all, so anyone who knows French better than me.
Yeah, I stopped taking French in 3rd grade, and I learned how to say green beans, and I learned how to sing the national anthem with lyrics in front of me. Yeah, exactly. Nice, very nicely done. And but yeah, sadly, my knowledge of French is exclusive to French cinema. And that's about it.
Same here. So yes, that one is another lighthearted comedy about a day at the fair. It's this small, like provincial French countryside farming village. There's a fair coming, and in that one, Jacques Tati plays Francois the postman, and it's kind of him going through his daily routine of being a postman in this weird zany town, and then eventually there's a little cinema set up at the fair, and he sees a movie about what the Americans are doing with their postmen. And it's a pretty funny little thing that they edited together of like how they're using helicopters and like parachuting onto balconies, and like all these strong men are the postmen, and everyone starts making fun of him because he can't do that. So the third act of that is him trying to deliver the mail American style, going as fast as he can. And that is quite an enjoyable time.
And with that first film, does he have that distinctive visual style yet, with like with the long shots and kind of minimal dialogue, or is he kind of still finding his voice, as it were?
It's there. It's not as expressed as it is in Playtime. There's a lot more dialogue in Jour de Fête than I think in any of the other movies combined. But there are scenes where like he's helping them try to set up the pole with the flag. Then he realizes, oh wait, I have this telegram I need to go deliver. So it's him running down the street. You see the pole in the background waving back and forth. So it's definitely there to an extent, and it's still very physical. It's a lot of that pantomiming, a lot of that kind of like silent comedy tradition in the sound era. So it's not dialogue gags as much as it is the visual ones that he's really known for.
Yeah, it's weird. Like humor is such a weird thing to talk about, because I feel like just by doing a podcast about humorous movies, I feel like sometimes the joke can be lost in a lot of ways. It's like, well, how did they set up this guy? They did it like blah blah. It's like so it's like almost like an academic approach to discussing comedy kind of like destroys what makes comedy great. But it's hard to really, for people who have not seen this movie, it's hard to describe just how unusual and distinctive his style of humor is, because I feel like it is such he stands alone in terms of he's got this kind of silent visual style, but at the same time, every little thing from like a wrench working on like a like on a bolt can be incorporated into the humor, the weird little sound effects. So there's no other filmmaker that's ever come before or since that has had his approach, and I almost feel like it would be like a disservice to him trying to really like explain why it works. But I'm trying to find like the appropriate entry point into discussing why Jacques Tati is such a badass, because there's no other comparison. You could talk about Buster Keaton. I think Buster Keaton's probably the closest approximation to his style, because he loves engineering. He loves like the physical stunt work. He loves setting up these really, really elaborate gags. And they also have that kind of like stoic, laconic, stone-faced sense of humor at times. But there is a playfulness to Jacques Tati that's so utterly French and different from the kind of the very athletic kind of like gearhead humor of Buster Keaton. But I don't feel like it's a fair comparison either to compare Jacques Tati to Charlie Chaplin, because Charlie Chaplin, granted, they're very poetic, but I feel like Chaplin's films are much more emotional in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And Tati, emotion isn't necessarily the first thing that would come to mind when discussing his films. It's almost like, I don't know, I mean, I'm rambling at this point. How would you, Dave Eves, try to categorize in a few words what is kind of the essence of Jacques Tati's approach to filmmaking?
Like a live action Where's Waldo book. There's just, the frame is filled with all of these things, and kind of has that,
that
like,
totally works.
It's like a cartoon in live action. It's not designed like the traditional storytelling method. He didn't want to do 3x structure. He just wanted to do his own thing, and it literally is like an uber detailed comic pane come to life.
Yeah, I mean, it's like his films basically are 90 minutes to 120 minutes of just little teeny tiny vignettes and skits that are kind of loosely held together by an overarching premise. But you could pretty much start any of his movies at any point in the movies and just dive right in. And you'll have, no one's gonna be like, oh, well, you got to know all the continuity. It's like, no, there is no continuity. It's just him and his trench coat and his little hat and his pipe, kind of in his signature outfit, just getting involved in these strange predicaments. But one thing I will say about his movies, and this is something I once heard Russ Meyer, attributed to Russ Meyer by Roger Ebert, but he said, when he was talking about Russ Meyer, he said, you can basically turn on any of his movies and from a single frame recognize it as his. And I feel like the same holds true for Jacques Tati.
Oh, yeah.
Of the 4 films that I've seen, you show me one frame of any of them, I'm like, oh, that's Jacques Tati. Like, he's got these long shots. And I've never seen someone who makes movies essentially exclusively in long shots. No close-ups, almost no medium shots, and I feel like so much of humor is in someone's face, whether it's Jim Carrey going, being all strange, but he just totally does not allow the audience to essentially see the faces of any of his characters.
No, it's the whole like physical body performance, and like he studied miming, and I think that you can see it in his physicality and his performance, because the performance literally is his whole body. If you just look at like a single clip, you can tell that he's completely engineered his walk to be a certain way. And when you see him play different characters, like in Jour de Fête, he's holding himself completely differently than he holds himself as Mr. Hulot. Because
Interesting. So he has different like characters.
Yeah, he doesn't have many, because he got his start in I don't know what you call the French. It's not like vaudeville. I don't know what the French equivalent would have been in the 30s, but he did sports impersonations, because he started off as an athlete. He was a rugby player. I literally just had the Wikipedia article open because I'm that professional that Wikipedia is my main source.
You can tell even into his advanced age, he was still a really, really strong physical dude.
Oh, yeah, especially like in Traffic when he's like climbing a tree and he's like 60 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible just like what he was able to put himself in. But even when you like watch him playing tennis, like the physical comedy that he does, you can't do it unless you're really, really athletic. Even if it's chasing a sprinkler around a circle, trying to capture the water, like that's exhausting. If you do more than one take, you're going to get worn out. So I know that there's some guys like Peter Sellers, who obviously was very physical in his performances, but in terms of his health was kind of fragile. This guy, that's why I feel like the Buster Keaton comparison is appropriate to a degree, just because they both just had this incredible physical resilience and endurance.
Yes. Well, Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin were his idols. I think that's what he wanted movies to still be like, even though it was something that was a thing of the past, even when he got started in the late 40s.
Yeah, I think I guess Charlie Chaplin's last quote-unquote silent movie, even though it's not 100% totally silent, was Modern Times, which I believe was 36, if I have the year correct, but it's obviously got a little bit of sound and a few bits, but for anyone who was pining for the days of the silent era, they were sadly in the rear view mirror by the late 40s.
Yeah, but he was doing short films prior to that. He wasn't directing anything. His directorial debut was Jour de Fête. He might have actually done the short film that is based off of first. Again, me claiming to be the expert, doesn't know my facts, but that's okay.
Well, here's one fact I found interesting, was that I believe it was Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. Was that the first? It was one of the first comedies ever to win the Cannes Film Festival. And I think maybe only like one or two ever have really won the Cannes Film Festival. But it's comedy in the Academy and at film festivals is often kind of frowned upon or looked down upon. But I feel like Jacques Tati was one of the few guys to break that rule, where he seemed to routinely get nominated for Best Foreign Film and things like that. So I like the fact that at least he wasn't a neglected genius in his day. He might have suffered from financial trouble, but at least his films were beloved and successful at the times of their release.
Yes. I think that there's something, I think you can say that, not to put down any comedy that doesn't have anything serious on its mind. Comedy is comedy, and it's a hard thing to do. But I think there's something to be said about Tati's films in which they're not quite satire, but they're still satirizing society in a very, very distinct and unique way. And each one is a different
I would love to see
what
he would say about social media culture and mobile phone culture, because I feel like nobody is better, maybe in the history of filmmaking, on showing how technology affects the way we live our lives, whether it's the way the car kind of takes over your life in traffic, or the office structures and playtime. And I feel like even though he's not beating us over the head with any real serious kind of downer messages, he's very, very blatantly exploring man's relationship to the spaces in which he lives, the homes that they design, the vacation resorts that they attend, how they drive. So I feel like he's definitely got a lot of social commentary. It's just funny as fuck. It's not some serious he's not pretentious about it, which is what makes it so light and so refreshing.
I don't feel like while I'm watching it, like he's saying, this is why you're wrong. This is what's all wrong with society. It's just pointing out the absurdity of it.
Absolutely. Cars have come. What are we going to do about it? And how are they going to affect our lives and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish he had had a chance to explore computer culture. I also feel like it's a crime against humanity that he never got a chance to direct someone like Jackie Chan or some really, really physical performer. Because I feel like he's so great at directing himself and inserting himself into situations. But even though there are lengthy passages in his movies where he just disappears entirely, just following other characters, and somehow these performers are able to take on kind of Jacques Tati qualities. I remember I think it's in Playtime, there's this great bit where this girl's walking across a dance floor, and one of her heels gets stuck in a crack in the floor, and she kind of stops, and she kind of lurches forward, and she kind of lurches back, and she's almost doing this weird little dance, trying to get her heel loose. And I feel like he had this an infectious, kind of contagious approach to that physical comedy that seemed to spill over to all of his collaborators on the screen.
It's amazing. I think it's especially apparent in Playtime, when literally I don't think there's many scenes where there's less than 5 characters on the screen, and they're all moving in a very specific way. There's long stretches where the entire frame is just filled with people. And the fact that he's able to just direct all of these people at once and for it to all seem fluid, like they all fit into this world, it's incredible.
Yeah, the fact that the level of rehearsal and orchestration involved, I can't even begin to imagine, because he's got but I guess it helps he doesn't move the camera much. The camera's pretty much always locked in place on a great angle, and then bananas kind of shit begins to ensue. And but there's some that are very, very subtle and poetic. I mean, there's that very, very famous shot from Playtime where he's waiting to meet with somebody, and he's in the foreground with kind of a helper or an underling of some kind, and then on the right side of the frame is this incredibly lengthy hallway where a guy's just walking toward the frame, and the guy keeps saying, "All right, we'll just wait, keep waiting," and it seems like 45 seconds before that other character finally it's like, "Oh, Monsieur, hello," and it starts starts talking to him, but yeah, I guess I don't want to oversimplify his approach, because I feel like there's a lot going on in his movies. It's not like he just sets up the camera like Georges Méliès in 1903 and just lets everything happen in front. There's some really, really sophisticated camera work at play. He just doesn't want to move it once the camera's in a good spot.
Yeah, it's the mise en scène is just very deliberate, and he's building a lot of these sets.
Excellent pronunciation of mise en scène, because Mikhail often struggles with that term. He's like, the mise en scène. I'm like, no, that's not accurate. And that's how I would pronounce it back in the day. But yeah, I can't remember how Mikhail does it, but he often struggles and trips over that turn of phrase.
Well, anytime you need someone to say mise en scène, I will step in just for that, and then I'll leave.
Excellent. Sounds good. I just need to have a pre-recorded explanation by you that I can just press play in the middle of episodes and watch his face turn crimson. But yeah, for people who've been missing Mikhail, he's actually been in Poland the last couple of weeks with his lady partner. But he is going to be back in action tonight on our UFC 200 fight commentary episode, which I know is an unusual change of pace for the podcast, but it is 4 film freaks in a room talking about movies while watching fights. So, that is neither here nor there and has no relation to Jacques Tati, but still wrote McKay. I just wanted to plug that. But anyway, I feel like I'm kind of all over the place. Maybe the best thing to do is to kind of start with Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, and we can kind of slowly but surely work our way forward, because I want to make sure we don't accidentally overlook or kind of like not give the appropriate due to any great moments or chapters in his filmmaking career. So, Dave Eves, Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. What's kind of the premise? What's the gist? What's happening in this movie?
Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, or Mr. Hulot's Holiday, depending on how you want to say it, is a look at the vacation-going middle class of France in the 1950s. And that's the synopsis. You could, in order to get more specific, you basically need to start talking about the individual things. This is one of, it's hard to say of these 4 films, which is my favorite, because the first 3 I love almost equally. But this, I think, is the most charming.
It's definitely the most accessible, I think. If you're going to sit someone down who's like kind of tired or not necessarily in the mood, this will be the easiest watch of the 4.
I probably have to agree with that. It's the kind of movie where you can just put it on any time of day, and you'll just, by the time it's over, you'll just have a smile on your face. And the movie starts out with watching people kind of migrate to the beach. And it has a great shot of people trying to figure out what train they're going to, running back and forth between subway lines. And I believe it's not, this might be the earliest introduction of the character Mr. Hulot in any of his movies, but you don't see him directly. The first thing you see of him in is his car, which is this horribly outdated junk piece of car that's constantly breaking down. It's obviously too small for the man inside of it. And it's wonderful. Guy. He's like 6'4", I think.
Yeah, he's massive. He's a big, strong man.
Yeah. So you see this broken down car trying to travel alongside all these buses and trains and everything, and you already see that Mr. Hulot is this person that does not quite fit in with everybody else, but he doesn't care. He doesn't maybe even realize he doesn't fit in. He's just his own unique person. And it's just this travel to this beachside resort. And you just kind of see people relaxing on the beach and doing beachy type things. Meanwhile, he's kind of messing things up and not quite fitting in with society.
It should also be said that this is, of the 4 that I watched, the only one in black and white.
Yes, it is it's the only one of the Mr. Hulot films that is in black and white. And he did not make any attempts to shoot this one in color, unlike Jour de Fête, jumping back, which he did attempt to shoot in color. But by the time the movie was finished, the company that made that color film stock had gone out of business, so it had to be shown in black and white.
Also, quick question with Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. Is this the only one that's shot in the traditional Academy ratio, kind of the 4:3, or is Mon Uncle also in that? If memory serves correctly, Mon Uncle's a little wider.
Geez, I'm gonna have to look that. I'm gonna look that up right now, because I know that Mon Uncle and Traffic are both in a more 4:3 aspect ratio, whereas
Traffic definitely is, and obviously Playtime is like super widescreen and everything.
Yeah.
Well, not super widescreen, but it's widescreen. But Mon Uncle, I like to believe it's not in the traditional Academy ratio, because I'm just thinking of some of the images of like the house and like those crazy windows. But like I said, I watched all these films very quickly together, along with a lot of Bogdanovich and Joe so some of the details are spilling over. If I start talking about gremlins showing up in a Tati film, you know that my memories are getting blurred.
According to IMDb, Mon Uncle is 137-1, but again, in that film, the frame is just so filled that it feels like it's filling up your TV screen. You don't even notice the black bars. But
because I feel like that's one thing that's missing. I mean, his humor is in that it is so visual. I feel like the framing is a crucial part of the gag, and I guess it was Terry Jones in one of the introductions talked about. It's the first time while watching Jacques Tati's films that he realized that comedy could also be poetry.
Yes,
Terry Jones obviously knows a thing or two about being funny. He's veteran of Monty Python, one of the funniest motherfuckers that's ever lived, and he obviously had great appreciation for different types of humor. But Tati, probably in European cinema at at that time stands alone, where he took such meticulous care in the visual presentation of his comedy, in addition to whatever insanity might be taking place on the screen.
I believe I've heard this, so someone correct me if I'm wrong, that the Monty Python guys were friends with Jacques Tati. Because, I mean, they were working kind of at the same time in the late 60s, early 70s. And I believe that they had become
Tati was toward the end of his career, but still. But yeah, I guess Monty Python did as he was kind of wrapping things up. Yeah. But
so I they would have been them being influenced by them, especially since, again, Terry Jones. I have the Criterion disc set, which is amazing, and he's on a bunch of discs doing introductions for the films.
He's done a ton of Criterion introductions. He's done like introductions for like Preston Sturges movies, like what's that one? Unfaithfully Yours. But yeah, it's funny. He doesn't necessarily come across as like a hardcore cinephile, but he seems to have seen a lot of great movies. So, and obviously, it's great insights.
I don't doubt it.
Another interesting fan of Tati is David Lynch. There are a couple of interviews online of him talking about this, and David Lynch is not necessarily a movie buff. He has certain filmmakers that he loves, and he's got certain aesthetics that he loves and is inspired by, but he is a prolific artist. He's always painting or doing photography or making movies. If you're doing that much creation, you just don't have that much time to be sitting around gorging on old movies. So I'm always curious when I hear David Lynch talking about a filmmaker, because I just know he's not one of those guys that watches 3 movies a day, year in and year out. He's got more things to do with his time. But he really seems to love Tati. Maybe because they both are into cars. They're both huge car buffs.
Oh, really? I could see that. I do have a fun Philly fact. This is something I heard in an interview with David Lynch. He saw Mr. Hulot's Holiday. That was his first Jacques Tati movie he saw while living in Philadelphia when he was going to college here.
Interesting. I didn't even know David Lynch went to Philadelphia for college. What school did he attend?
Oh, my goodness. I can't remember the name of the school. It's not one of the big ones these days, but I know that he hated it in Philadelphia, and that's where all of the darkness in his movies comes from Philadelphia.
Gotcha. When did he make the switch to AFI? Late 60s?
Or the early 70s, because that's where he shot Eraserhead. There is a neighborhood in Philadelphia that they call the Eraserhood, because that's where he was living when he was in Philly, and a lot of people
inspiration for the screenplay.
Yeah, and a lot of people accidentally think that he shot Eraserhead in Philadelphia, but that is not the case. He shot that all in Los Angeles.
Because it took him years, and I know he was a student at the time. Yeah, he definitely. Did he shoot any of his short films in Philadelphia? Like, what's it like? 6 People Getting Sick or something like that. And there's also like ABCs. But some of those early shorts are just eerie as hell to watch.
I haven't seen a lot of his early stuff. I don't think he'd gotten into film yet when he was in Philly. I think when he was here, he was mostly just working on his painting.
Well, back to Tati and Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. I mean, while watching this, there are a lot of French films where you just want to, like, these are the people you want to hang out with or vacation resorts you want to go to. But like Monsieur Hulot's Holiday has like a lightness and a breeziness to it where you do want to be in this world. And it's like, even hearing the music, I mean, I had the theme music stuck in my head for fucking, for days after watching this.
It's not going to go away. But it'll be there forever.
Yeah, it just seems like a very, very chill, cool place to hang.
That's where I want to go on vacation. But in the 50s.
Yeah, the only other one that I can think of would be, was it Pauline at the Beach, the Eric Romer movie? Was it Pauline at the Beach or Paulette at the Beach? I can't remember the name.
I actually haven't seen that.
Early 80s time.
So you'll have to be the expert.
Yet another French vacation movie. And so, yeah, the French seem, I guess because they all take off for August, they have a deep knowledge and appreciation for kind of vacation culture. Like they seem to do it better than the rest of the world. But Monsieur Hulot, I guess I'm trying to think of specific gags I really love from it. I think one of my favorites is the one with the horse. And Terry Jones talks about this, but it's actually, most of it is mime. There's no horse there. He keeps coming up from the corner of a barn, and it looks as if a horse is pulling on him. But it's just him doing like a Buster Keaton kind of little comedy bit. And it's pretty awe-inspiring stuff. But yeah, he's a great illusionist on top of filmmaker and performer.
Yes. There are gags in that are great. I mean, this is where I think you really start to see him painting. Like, it wouldn't be a Jacques Tati movie without all these side characters that you barely get to meet, but you know exactly who they are. Like in that one, you have the Marxist who is like constantly spouting off like all this Communist Manifesto things to anyone who will listen. Most people don't want to listen. You just see like him listening to music, which is distracting people. He'll open a door and just the wind will distract everyone. And he's constantly trying to avoid and run away from the, like, I guess you could call him the porter of the hotel that he's staying at. And there's some great gags with his footprints where he's hiding, and like the porter will hear something and he'll look and there'll be nothing there, and he'll look down. There's like this big circle of footprints that have completely avoided him when Hulot's trying to get up to his room.
Yeah, and another great one is when he's replacing a tire and he's like near like a graveyard.
Oh, he accidentally
picks up a tire and it's covered in like mud and he's got it's like the tire's covered in like mud and leaves, and somebody's coming by like collecting like reeds, and he kind of takes it from him. But I feel like once again it's a funny gag, but it's also like interesting commentary, and I feel like some of his best gags are always kind of doing a couple things at the same time. It's like you have the obvious physical comedy, but then you have the additional social commentary that kind of like bleeds through.
My favorite gag from that scene, because he's thanking all the other people at the funeral for helping him out with his car, and he's shaking their hands, and everyone starts leaving, and then everyone's like shaking his hand, like my condolences, and he's like, what? And he doesn't understand what's going on.
Yeah, no, it's astonishing stuff. I guess I'm trying to think of like a good double feature that this movie would go with, but I'm trying to think of like Buster Keaton feature-length films. But most Buster Keaton movies at least have a plot, whether it's Sherlock Jr. or The General or whatever. Like they do have like a 3-act structure. I can't think of any other like silent comedies that just have a scenario that just never quite stops. I mean, even like Charlie Chaplin with the Mutual films, which I think are all roughly like 20 minutes in length in the teens, still have like a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
Whereas this movie, it's not like there's no real pitch. It just, like you said, it's him at the resort. And that's the story.
Shit happens.
Like, you know,
that's the plot of all of his movies. Happen.
Yeah, and there's just silliness. But I guess it was the first one I watched. It made me an instant fan, and I feel like everything you need to know about this persona that he created is there in the movie. And I love it when comedians create a persona. I know he got kind of tired of using this character after a while, and he had producers always pressuring him to kind of do like a formulaic approach, almost kind of like Peter Sellers got trapped in his Pink Panther mode for a while. Mm-hmm. He just kept being asked to do this part over and over and over again to the point where he just not that into it anymore. So I guess my question for you is, was it a mistake on his part not to play the game a little bit more and kind of follow some of these commercial instincts that some of his peers were suggesting that he follow? Because I feel like he could have made one of these movies every 2 or 3 years, for 20, 30 years, and retired a very, very rich man if he had chosen to.
I think, for me, I would have loved to see more of these movies. So on my behalf, I'm sad he didn't make more. But for him, there's a quote from him saying that he could have gotten tons and tons of money if he went to Hollywood and brought Mr. Hulot with him. And there were a lot of offers for that, but he said that I would not be happy making those movies. So I'm happy that he was able to, at least for a few films, be able to make exactly what he wanted to make. But we'll kind of get onto his later career when we get there, because I do feel that in the end that he did make some sacrifices, which are a little sad.
Yeah, I guess, that's the question, like, do you follow what makes you, obviously as a filmmaker as distinctive and unusual as him, if he's not following what makes him attracted to the medium in the first place, would his films even be remotely as effective as they are? If you tried to do a boilerplate approach, all the magic would probably be lost.
Yeah, and I can't imagine him bringing Hulot to Hollywood and letting them, again, like, even from the start of Mr. Hulot's Holiday, he's obviously the character you see the most, but he's just as he's a background character at the same time, just as much as everyone else is a background character. You got Mr. What's the businessman's name that keeps taking the phone calls every time that anything remotely fun could be happening? Because I can't remember his name.
I can't remember either. No, like I said, I watched all 4 of these little rapid clips, so some of the specifics are a little jumbled. So
yeah, because in that one you got all these side characters. You got, like, again, the porter of the hotel that's constantly angry at Hulot because he's messing up the feel of the hotel. You got the businessman that's always taking calls. You got his family. You have the woman in the resort down the street. It's kind of like, I guess you could say, I don't want to say love interest. I don't think Hulot really has love interests, but there's always like the primary female character in them.
There's sexy females in his movies, but they're not necessarily sexy movies. Like,
no.
You have these incredibly stylish looking women who are wearing like exotic black leather pants and all kinds of hot shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like he spends a lot of time kind of like ogling. It's not like Woody Allen, who obviously was incredibly preoccupied with sex throughout pretty much every movie he's ever made.
Mm-hmm.
Monsieur Hulot seems to be surprisingly conservative sexually for a Frenchman. He defies the stereotype.
I think for him, he's just creating this character that's almost out of time. And I think in order to give Hulot these like desires like that would be a disservice to the character, especially as he gets older, because he's just this gentleman that's from a time gone by.
100%. Well, yeah, going back to like the whole like when they should have gone Hollywood or not. I can only imagine if Hollywood had recruited him, you can immediately tell like, oh, we got to have. It would have been like when Elvis went to Hollywood and he made 36 basically interchangeable shitty movies with like musical numbers. Where you've got subplots and different characters, like kind of like very, very routine things. But it'd be easy to see how a late 50s, early 60s kind of like musical comedy Hollywood style would have starred him. And they just would have been utterly atrocious. So
most likely.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to Mon Uncle, which I feel like is the first movie where you really see his really distinctive visual style start to flourish. I remember in college, my first major film book, I think it was by Gerald Mast, and most of the pictures were kind of black and white, but in the middle of the book had actually some glossy color pictures. And I remember vividly back then, some of the main pictures, the feature attraction were from Mon Uncle, of the house with those two kind of like really, really memorable windows at night, were almost like two eyes looking out. And that shot always stuck with me. For whatever reason, it took me nearly 20 years to watch the movie. But as I was watching, I was like, oh shit, that's from my first like film history book. I remember that. And so it all came rushing back.
It's always fun to find those things like, oh, I know what that's from, or I know that. I now know what it's from. So Mon Uncle is about Jacques Tati's Mr. Hulot and his nephew and his sister and her husband. And it's, if you want to get a little bit more what it's satirizing or what the social commentary is, it's about the burgeoning suburbs of Paris. It starts off with the credits being printed on these like building signs as you see construction going on in the background. And then you move from the suburbs into more of the old Paris not country, like the old Paris city where Mr. Hulot lives. And then you also see this, again, the crazy house that you mentioned, this like keeping up with the Jones style, like the most modern stuff. And it's the most impersonal house and most impractical house you could ever possibly imagine.
That's a total alarming lack of practicality, which I think is best captured in that scene where the husband and wife get trapped in their own garage and are having trouble escaping it, which I was just
they need the
howling. And they're trying to get the little baby wiener dog to walk across the electric meter that would allow like the automatic door to open. Of course, the dog is too small and goes right underneath the electric eye. And I was like, God, that's Tati at its best, where you have a solution, but the solution doesn't work because, of course, the dog is like, his back is only a couple inches off the ground. And then, of course, you have the maid. It's like, oh no, I'm afraid of electricity. I'm going to electrocute me. Yeah, but I was just. I don't laugh out loud a lot while watching Tati's films. Where it's not like you're kind of like going like, you're not kind of like cracking up. You're just kind of always like amused and interested. However, during that garage scene, I was cackling like a hyena. I love that scene.
I'm going to say of his four Mr. Hulot movies that Mon Uncle is probably the funniest. I think it has the most gags, and like, again, Hulot's Holiday, very charming. This one is just funny. It has, like, when he's in the kitchen trying to, like, figuring out, like, this one pot bounces. It's like, let me see if this glass bounces. And it doesn't. It just breaks. And that's funny. And
absolutely.
All these chairs that they keep trying to get people to sit in that just don't really make sense. And just like, oh, don't go that way. You need to go inside the door to get to the patio, even though you could just walk right to the patio that's right there. And just seeing this very rigid style that his sister and her brother-in-law are trying to maintain for themselves. And just this, again, then you cut back to the old world, and it's just these people taking their time going to a cafe. And again, so many characters here. Like even the dog is a character. You see the dog going to the old town with all his dog friends. And you know it's him because
Yeah,
he's always wearing like a sweater.
I love all the shit with the dog. He uses dogs a lot in this movie.
He
Even like
does.
at the beginning of I'm sure Who Loves Holidays, like a car pulls up and nearly runs a dog over. But like he obviously loved dogs, and there's a great bit for the German Shepherd in traffic. Yeah, so dogs, animals are very very tough to predict and control and kind of wrangle on set, but he seemed to have used them incredibly effectively time and time again.
Yes. And just to go on about more characters in the old world part of Paris, you see this street sweeper that just never gets the pile out of the middle of the road. He keeps getting distracted, keeps trying to do other things. It's just amazing what he's able to do with such a short amount of time, yet instantly, just from that, you know, like, oh, I know that bit, I know that character, I know what's going on here.
Now, I know some critics, and I do not share this view, but there's some film historians and writers who say that his films are so impersonal that it almost kind of keeps the audience at a distance. And one thing, like, humor is so subjective, and I feel like if you find something hysterical, you find something hysterical, and it's going to be very, very hard to persuade someone who doesn't find it hysterical to be so. But I guess I would just want to ask you, do you think at any point, maybe his 4 films, because of his style, that it keeps some audience members at a distance, where there just some people who just don't necessarily get the joke?
I can see that maybe some people don't get the joke. I can definitely see that, but I'm going to totally disagree in them being impersonal, because again, he's not working so much with characters as he is working with societies. That's what he's building in all of his films. And the societies, even though Mon Oncle was made in 1958, it is almost 60 years old. I live in the suburbs. I get it. I see it. He's satirizing where I like the society that I live in now. It's not changed that much. And he's making fun of it as it's emerging. And he's doing
especially how like suburbanites, I can't say, I'm just one of the reasons I love living in an apartment in New York. Suburbanites, your house is almost like, I don't know, it's not necessarily like jewelry, but it's almost like an accessory, and you're constantly working on it, and you're constantly comparing your accessory with everyone else's accessories, and whether it's how your sprinklers work, or your new fountain, or your new manicured lawn, or your new garage, but everyone's got like kind of their gadgets and their style, and they're constantly, it's just like these ongoing projects that never quite seem to stop, but you can't not play that game because everybody's playing that game, because everybody's living in the same neighborhood with kind of interchangeable houses, and that's one part of suburban life that I feel like this film really nails cold.
One of my favorite gags in the movie is about that fish fountain where they keep turning it on. It's like, oh, no, it's just my brother, turn it off. Or, oh, it's just a worker, turn it off, it's not worth it. And like, instead of just keeping it on all the time, it's just turned on only when they think it's somebody important, which is like their neighbor or...
No, my mom's the exact same way. She has a fountain at her home in Richmond, and it has this like elaborate screen they have to put on or take off so they keep leaves out. And I'm like, just either get rid of the fountain or just run the fountain, but let's stop fucking with the fountain, because we're constantly having like manipulate things on it and everything. So yeah, I can relate to that scene.
And I think that's where it is. They're relatable. Once you relate to it, it doesn't matter if it's like, oh, it's all long shots. Oh, I don't get to know these people. They don't have personal journeys. That doesn't matter as much, because of the fact that you recognize what he's saying, and again, it's not mean. It's not mean-spirited what he's making fun of. It's just pointing out the absurdity of it and how even his own life is absurd. So everything's absurd, and that's okay. It's okay to laugh at that sometimes.
Now, do you think there's some personal elements in this movie that aren't necessarily in the other ones? Because I remember there's like one scene toward the end where the mother and father see him asleep in the business, like they see him asleep on the sofa, and they're basically talking about getting rid of him or kicking him out, and they're talking about how like how their son loves him, but he's almost depicted as kind of like a loafer in a lot of ways in this, and maybe perhaps in his professional career, because he worked intermittently and had these huge giant chunks of time in between films, is this perhaps a little glimpse into some of the shit people would give him maybe in France, that he wasn't necessarily getting like just a good job and kind of doing the suburban thing? Or am I reading too much into this, do you think?
Well, now that you say, I was about to say no, I don't see that. But again, I did recently find out this morning that when he gave up his sports career to take up comedy and performance, his family was not happy and kind of disowned him. I don't want to say disowned him, but like wrote him off a little bit, saying like, you're making a huge mistake. We're in the middle of the Great Depression. What are you doing here? You live a comfortable lifestyle and you want to give that up to be this poor, starving artist. And obviously that paid off for him in the long run, but I can kind of see that. And I also think it's kind of like, it's even more than just a personal thing. It's kind of this new society trying to like, oh, we got to get rid of this old way of thinking. We got to kind of maintain our new suburbanite thinking. And they're trying to constantly change Hugh Lowe in that movie. They're trying to get him a job at the factory where they make tubing. I don't even know. And he can't even do that right.
Yeah. Also, this movie has some, maybe my favorite shots that he ever did was his home in Paris, like the huge long shots of his building and seeing the elaborate route he has to take to get upstairs to his bedroom might be some of the coolest visual. And I think it was you that I've seen do some GIFs
I did
this
do
scene. Yeah, with walking simultaneously in all the different
all the different places. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean that GIF. I don't know who did, but I like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just gorgeous stuff. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like that building, it captures all the wonderful playfulness that he's got in terms of like loving architecture and space and toys. He just really loves the way buildings are constructed and how we interact with them, especially if it's an old building, which is almost like a little miniature labyrinth in its own way. But there seems to be so much life and personality and character to that building that's missing from this thoroughly modern home out in the suburbs.
Neither is practical, but one is more.
One's got heart and personality.
Exactly.
The other feels like a toy you got for Christmas that no one can figure out how to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I'm trying to think, what are some of the other great bits from Mon Uncle that I really, really love? Because like just certain things jump out at me, like the fountain bit, like the garage, like the building. But I'm trying to think of any other major like set pieces or gags that I'm overlooking.
It's so constant that it's hard to think about anything in particular. I think the whole scene where they're trying to set him up with their neighbor, and they're just like at this party, and he clearly doesn't fit in. He's accidentally poked a hole in the hose that goes to the fountain, and the water's just
I love that.
up.
Yeah. And that's like vintage, like Peter Sellers stuff, and everybody keeps like kind of like stepping on it, and it comes out the fountain, and you move, and it starts blasting again. But it almost was like something like, do you ever see the movie The Party? I think that's a Blake Edwards movie.
I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, The Party's pretty cool, but it reminded me like a bit from The Party, which is early '60s. Peter Sellers plays an Indian who's trying unsuccessfully to fit in at this rather kind of suburban party, and it's just nothing's going according to plan. But
yeah.
That's for the Blake Edwards episode, which I will do at some point. Blake Edwards episode.
And I think the one joke that really makes me laugh out loud, like one of the first introductions to the brother-in-law is him parking in this very specific parking spot. It's blocked out just for him. And after he's gotten Hugh Lowe hired there, he's driving, he's following all his arrows. Then he gets to his parking spot, and there you see Mr. Hugh Lowe's bicycle just in the spot right where in his important managerial spot. And that's just like, you don't see it coming. It's just there. And instantly, like, you don't even see Mr. Hugh Lowe in that scene, but his character is all over the screen and just seeing this object that is his. Yeah,
even when he disappears from the movies, he's definitely still the heart of the flick. I'm trying to think, can you think of any filmmakers whose style or approach has been affected by or influenced by this approach? Because he does certain scenarios that you feel like could come from other movies, but I'm trying to think of any specific heirs to the Tati style. And obviously no one's going to have that interesting combination of just like silent filmmaking combined with sound effects and that sparse dialogue. But in terms of these physical gags and these very specific setups he does, almost, I don't know, I'm trying to think, can you think of any kind of like spiritual successors to this approach?
Okay, I can. Number one, there is a French filmmaker whose films I've not explored, unfortunately, Pierre Etat, I believe his name is, and he worked on Mon Uncle. He was either a collaborator or helped out with some gags, and he made several films that were in a very similar style to Jacques Tati, I believe. He's a filmmaker that I've really been wanting to dig into. And
does Criterion put out any of his stuff, or is he?
Yes, there's actually a Criterion box set, I think, with 6 of his movies. that I've
Very
been
nice. I need to get Criterion to sponsor this fucking podcast so I can, get credit for advertising on these wonderful DVDs.
Well, you know what? Now's the time to buy them because this is the 50% off sale at Barnes & Noble. So whenever I go, I will probably end up buying that because I've been meaning to.
My Barnes & Noble in my neighborhood sadly went bye-bye.
Oh, no.
Well, I mean, I never went in there, so I was probably
you
part of the
were
problem.
helping.
So, yeah, I was not helping. All right, well, maybe it's time to move on to what many regard as his masterpiece, and a film in which many ways kind of destroyed him financially, but the epic 70mm extravaganza known as Playtime, which definitely stands alone in the 120-year history of comedy in terms of the ambition of the technical achievement as well as the unusual style of comedy. But I feel like everything Tati had been working toward his entire career is kind of summed up in this film. It's just sad that it took him so long to make it and that he had to take on so much personal debt in order to make the film that he wanted to make.
And I think viewing it in 2016, it was totally worth it. I don't know how he felt about that. It was not as well received, I think, as his other films, especially coming off of Monuncle, which had won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film. I think that was kind of like his height of his career. And then Playtime was probably the height of his artistic career, but not really seeing success.
Well, when you work so infrequently, it's very easy creatively to be kind of out of step with contemporary audiences. I mean, people forget, and if it takes you 10 years to make a movie, like an entire generation with different tastes and values can come and go in that time. If you look at Hollywood or international filmmaking in the late 50s compared to the late 60s, it is a different world entirely, and film was going through seismic changes, both in terms of the films that were being made as well as what movies people wanted to see.
Especially in France. I mean, between Monuncle and Playtime, the entire French New Wave happened.
Yeah, 100%. And he is not a French New Wave filmmaker at all. Like maybe there's like maybe a hint of the flavor of that in Monsieur Hulot's Holiday in terms of just kind of like that location filming, but you go from the era of like Marcel Carné and Jean Renoir and all these luminaries from the 30s and 40s to kind of like the Jean-Pierre Melville era, and then obviously once Godard, Truffaut, and Rivette and all those guys kind of came onto the scene, I guess when we study French film, we always obviously focus on the French New Wave in the 60s. One thing I've never known though, was there an alternative to the French New Wave that was considered like mainstream popular filmmaking in France, or was the French New Wave kind of mainstream? Like, I mean, obviously those are the films that have survived, but if you were a suburbanite from Monuncle, were you going to see Jean-Luc Godard films, or was there like kind of a cheesy mainstream pop culture that has kind of disappeared into the ashes of time?
I have to imagine there would have been, because I mean, they were fighting the old guard. It's not like they started off in the late 50s and said, all right, bye guys. They were trying to fight to say, no, this is the way film should be made. They're wrong. And I mean, they succeeded in the long run, but I'm sure that there were still movies being made in France that were still in the old style. Because you saw that in Hollywood, with New Hollywood in the late 60s and early 70s. People were obviously trying to copy that New Hollywood style, but you still saw older filmmakers.
Yeah, like it has to be like Paint Your Wagon, which is like an old school, cheesy Hollywood musical at a time when people really wanted to see Easy Rider.
Exactly.
Like, no, people want to hear Born to Be Wild in their musical. They don't want to hear Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood singing to each other. That's just not where audiences' tastes are.
I think that you will see some people with the fascination and the admiration of the old style still seeing those movies, but the new style does see its audience and eventually becomes the mainstream, which is kind of what we saw with the French New Wave, because that changed the way we look at movies. But anyways, back to Playtime.
French New Wave, because like on one hand, while the French New Wave is all like guerrilla filmmaking, like shooting on the street, sometimes they're non-actors, like very fast, very cheap. Playtime on the other end, Playtime is like a production. It is like a massive, meticulous, grand, ambitious, epic comedy, which is, I can't think of any movie. I mean, it's basically taking the scope and the design of a movie like Blade Runner and making a comedy about the modern man.
Yeah, it's almost a sci-fi movie the way it's portrayed.
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me of like Orson Welles' The Trial, with some of those like endless scenes, people at their desks, or some of the scenes from The Apartment, or even like King Vidor's The Crowd. There have been a couple movies in history that have kind of tackled what happens to people when we become part of like these large kind of corporate organizations. But this film really captures it well visually. I mean, I feel like you could make like there's an entire day of programming just from kind of like the marginalization of the individual amidst this corporate explosion.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And yeah, with this one, it's another one where it's stuff happens. It's
Do you ever
basically
feel like that at your day job?
oh, never, never at my job.
They're listening.
Of course, they're listening.
And then did he design this giant metal building for the film? I was reading a little bit about it, but
I believe he designed them and he built them. He built two essentially not complete skyscrapers, but I believe they had like 5 functioning floors, and the rest is a matte painting. And it was called Tativille. And in building those is where a lot of his financial trouble comes from, because they were these big steel, glass, metal contraptions. And he basically shoots the entire film within the 2 of those and redresses them to create this feeling of this, like Paris without heart. Like it's a commentary on
it's a building without a soul.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this whole commentary on like, oh, we're missing what makes Paris beautiful. We're replacing it all with these modern skyscrapers. And there's this great scene, because in this one, to kind of take a step back and say what it's about, Hugh Lowe is very much a side character in this one.
He disappears for lengthy passages.
Oh yeah. He has gone to this area of the city, I guess, to try to deliver a package or a letter to like a businessman, I guess, for his job, whatever he's doing at that time. And meanwhile, we're also following a tourist group from America that has come to see Paris for the first time. And they're kind of like intermingling there. And there's this great scene where the main female character, I guess you could say, from the tour group, is looking at all the other tourist brochures or the posters saying like, come visit Britain. And it's all the same skyscraper in each of them. And all these people are fascinated with seeing the city of the future, Paris, but they don't actually see the real Paris. It's only seen in reflections. You'll see a door open and you'll see the reflection of the Eiffel Tower in the background. And it's sad in a way. I would say of his movies, it's both comical, but it's also like disheartening. And I think it's also disheartening because it has a very muted color scheme. It's a lot of grays, a lot of blues, a lot of whites. And even
when they're at the restaurant, like parting their faces off, even that is kind of, in a weird way, not very lively in terms of the color scheme. It all seems just very, very chrome in a lot of scenes.
Oh yeah. Color does come into that at that point. That's when like it starts to liven up a bit. But even Hugh Lowe, his is not wearing his beige overcoat. He's in grays too. He's kind of like part of this system in a sense. And I think that's kind of sad. Even though he doesn't quite fit in, he's still trying to be a part of it, or at least is being asked to be a part of it. But that's still...
Anyway, so hey folks, sorry about that brief interruption. We are back. We were discussing Jacques Tati's Playtime. We were talking about like color schemes and set design and that sort of thing. But I can't remember from his biography from Wikipedia, but did he have any like hardcore engineering background or architectural preparation or training of any kind? Like, where do you think this preoccupation with structures and how we interact with our environments sprang from? I don't have my complication. Sprang or sprung, either or. You get the gist.
Sprung. I don't know.
Sprung.
I don't think he had any architectural background. I think he just was like obsessed with consumerism, really, and how like obsessed people were with things, and buildings just became another thing for us to be obsessed with. And I also think that at the time, because let's get back to the French New Wave here. In 1967, you also have Jean-Luc Godard's 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her. And a lot of that movie focuses on Paris is changing. We're building all these skyscrapers. And I don't particularly like 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her, but I think it kind of works with Playtime in that they discuss a lot of the same things about how Paris is changing. And considering his preoccupation, I guess you could say, with the old world and how things used to be in nostalgia, I can see him seeing it change even more drastically, especially like if all cities have these modern skyscrapers, all cities are going to look the same. Everything's going to lose it. What makes it individual, what makes it unique. I think that's where this movie's coming from. It's jumping off point. I think he felt like in order to really tell this, I need to build the thing that I'm making fun of.
Yeah, in fact, that's really captured well in the extended restaurant sequence where
Oh my goodness.
I don't even know if he's in it like a little bit with like the great bit with the door when they break the door and then they keep kind of using the handle, but seeing how interchangeable people can be in terms of what tables they are sitting at and what tables they want and what they're ordering and what they get and how they dance and how they look and how they interact. It's almost like people have lost almost any sense of any real individuality in this modern world. It's all about just certain attire, a certain restaurant, certain tables, certain it's like everybody's falling into certain established modes of interaction without any real individuality, apart from obviously Mr. Hulot, who's very clearly does not fit. And like the episode Breaking the Door, he's kind of like causing chaos wherever he goes.
Yeah, and he's tearing down like the establishment in a sense there.
In a very literal sense.
Literally. By breaking the door, suddenly the doorman can't be as guarded as to who comes in. You start seeing like hippies wandering in. He breaks, I think it's Hulot that breaks like the up, like something by the band. Suddenly there's this barrier created.
Yeah, falls down.
And I think it's really funny because like when you first get to the restaurant and first start seeing it, you're like, what's this scene? What's going on? And you see this like boisterous American come in. It's like, oh, that guy's a jerk. He just wants his table. But then like he becomes the hero of it kind of, and like because like again, taking a step back, the big thing with this restaurant is it's just opened and it's not quite built yet. Like the architects were literally putting the finishing touches on, and they're shooed away because you need to have the rich people, the people with status coming in and enjoying it. And they're getting like imprints on their backs from the chairs. Things are breaking. There's like this plane model that's melting because the air is not on. Then they turn the air on and it's too much. There's this great shot of like a woman's skin on her back just flapping in the breeze because the vents are too strong. And so it's this very rigid thing going on. And suddenly Hulot walks in and the barriers start breaking down. And in this back corner, they're kind of like building their own little society of like, this is where we're going to have fun. And this American that you kind of saw as being this asshole before, like, I want to sit here. I'm paying money. I want to sit wherever I want. He's suddenly saying like, no, you're not cool enough to be back here. Like, you're only coming back here if the restaurant's actually like malfunctioned on you. And it's kind of creating this more eclectic thing. And he fires the engineer and says, Hulot, now you're the engineer at this place. And Hulot actually takes the job seriously. They're saying like, maybe we should change this, we should change that. And suddenly like light starts coming in, color starts coming in, and the movie kind of like changes from that point.
Yeah.
And it becomes something more joyful.
They're in perfect contrast to the doorman who, like, even though the door's been broken, the doorman is still going through the motions.
He's holding the handle.
He's still playing his role like he's a cog in a wheel. And it's like, well, on one hand, you've got these people that are almost in a conspiratorial way, kind of like trying to like inject life back into the restaurant, whereas some of the other people, they have to follow their kind of their program to the bitter end, even past the point of it making any sense.
There's the guy, the waiter who I forget what it was that he did to his uniform that needs to wait out in the balcony, and people just keep taking pieces of his own uniform so that they can be functional. And so he's suddenly this unfunctional person in this, his role's been removed from him and he doesn't know what to do. And it's
what about the dance sequences? Like the dancing, it's cool because like on one hand I was blown away just by how well orchestrated the dancing going on, but on the other hand it's very mechanical. Like I guess I was admiring the choreography of just having all these people in frame, kind of like dancing around one another. But that was one of the few that really made me howl laughter out loud while watching this. Just like the different styles they all have, and just watching how people behave. Because it doesn't seem like any of them are actually having that much fun, but at the same time, they're still like kind of hurling themselves into this activity.
It seems almost like they're dancing because they feel like they have to.
Yeah,
like
100%.
There's a dance floor. Let's not eat. Let's just dance.
Like it doesn't matter. Like the music could possibly not even be playing. Like just because we are here, so we have to play out our roles to the end, even if no one actually wants to be here or do what we are doing. But
Yeah.
it is, there are a lot of very stylish, beautiful women. So it's interesting. It's like it's eye candy. It's fun to watch. But once again, like I said, like so many of his shots are accomplishing several things at once. They're providing commentary in addition to whatever physical humor might be at play.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm trying to think other great physical gags in playtime. I mean, obviously, I feel like in terms of the great mise en scène, as you said earlier, it seems like in the first part of the movie is where you get the majority of those great visual gags just because of the architecture of the building, where you see everybody in their cubicles or the lengthy hallways. But are there any sequences that really jump out at you as just like the signature achievements of his career from a visual standpoint?
I'm going to say there's a few. I think there's a great scene where he's waiting to meet with the guy that he's the entire reason that he's at this building is he's trying to meet with this guy. And he's sitting on this chair. And every time he sits down, it makes this great sound effect. And not to, again, jump back to everything with Tati, I think you mentioned it already. The sound effects in these movies are so deliberate and so funny. You could turn the visuals off and just listen to them. Even though there's very little dialogue. If you took the sound
out, the comedy would collapse if you took the sound out.
Completely. But he's messing with that chair, and you see that chair keep popping up throughout the rest of the movie. Like it's the only chair that exists in this world now because it's this new modern chair, and it doesn't look all that comfortable. It squeaks funny and makes fart noises basically when you sit on it. So that's a great scene. And then there's this. I think if there's there's the big restaurant scene, but if there's anything you take away from the movie, he's met this old army buddy. And he's invited him into his home. And little does Hulot know that in literally the next apartment over is the guy that he's been trying to meet the whole movie. And these apartments have these gigantic windows. So basically you can see everything that goes on inside. And the camera's out on the street, so you can't even hear what's going on inside. And you basically see Hulot and his army buddy's family watching TV, going about their routine, where in the next apartment over, you see the guy that he's trying to meet with basically doing the same exact thing. It's just this very, very unique thing about, again, like the suburban.
It's a long sequence. It's a 10 or 15 minute sequence would totally collapse if you didn't see it in widescreen. So it's like you would lose part of like the windows. I mean, Terry Jones in his introduction was talking about how watching this on VHS, the entire scene doesn't even play because you can't see all the action as it unfolds, and how as certain people leave rooms or come back in, the rooms almost seem to be interacting off one or kind of like responding to one another as if the wall is not there. Mm-hmm. So, but once again, there's no dialogue. It's like a really, really, really long comedic sequence, but how the hell they choreographed that or like rehearsed that, I have no idea how much preparation be involved, but it plays. I guess the most simple things on screen are almost the most complicated things to produce. So I can't imagine just the effort that must have been involved in creating that entire sequence. But it's definitely one of the standout sequences of the movie.
I have to imagine that the rehearsal time was just astronomical with this movie because there's so many carefully played out things in this. It's so particular. Like from the very first shot in the movie when you're at the Paris airport, everyone's moving in rigid lines. People are just filling the roles. And there's like even lines on the floor and people will move literally at geometric angles. You don't even see like circles in the movie until the end. It's so meticulously crafted. And I think it pays off beautifully. But going back to what you said about Mr. Hulot's Holiday earlier, that's the most accessible one. I think this is maybe the hardest entry point if you're not familiar with this style.
One, it needs, I guess if you wanted to try to make it accessible, I'm not saying this should change the thing, but just missing a little theme song like dun 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 dun, like that theme music just keeps things kind of light and fun and playful in the earlier movies where it's just I guess that's part of the point. It's just like he's trying to show kind of the mechanization of society, and if you were to add some fun music, that would destroy the whole theme of the movie. Mm-hmm. So I feel like he has to keep it kind of cold and distant in order to drive that point home. But it does have nice little like light bits. I mean, like when I can't remember if it's a bus or a train he hops on and somebody's holding like some long pole and he kind of grabs onto that. But that's like pure vintage Buster Keaton where you're using one prop as if it were another, and it's just like basic sight gags. So I don't want to give people the idea that this movie is like watching The Trial, because it's not like watching The Trial. It's just more like watching The Trial than Monsieur Hulot's Holiday.
Yeah. Another movie that comes to mind when watching this is Brazil.
Oh, fuck yeah. 100%. Yeah.
A lot of bureaucracy.
That would be a brilliant double feature, because I feel like it does twist all the kind of absurdity of bureaucracy really, really well. I mean, obviously, Brazil is more of like a dystopian future, whereas Playtime is very much the present and a commentary on society. But they're both films that would go hand in hand together thematically in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to his last one, which I actually still really enjoyed, Traffic, which doesn't seem necessarily get the love that a lot of these other ones get, but it is a damn entertaining movie, and it's, you know, like I said, it's got some of my favorite bits with dogs, but it's all the problems that are created from living your life out of a car, where your car basically kind of takes over, and once again, utterly devoid of plot, really, but it has a bunch of great little scenarios, and in spite of being kind of in advanced years, Jacques Tati doesn't seem to have lost a step as a performer or as a filmmaker. It's less ambitious visually, but it's still a very, very beautifully, meticulously shot flick.
Yeah. I would say that, oh my goodness, I had a complete point here and I forgot exactly what it was.
About Traffic or about Playtime?
About Traffic. Moving into it, I think after Playtime, his budgets were greatly reduced. Like Playtime was shot in 70 millimeters. Suddenly for Traffic, he's back down to 35. Back into the Academy standard aspect ratio, no longer widescreen. And I get the feeling that this was originally conceived as not being a Mr. Hulot movie, and Mr. Hulot kind of got shoehorned in at the end
to give it more commercial viability.
Yeah, because it seemed, I think you see Mr. Hulot the most in this one. He's not as much of a background character. He's kind of like there driving the plot. This also does have, compared to the other ones, it has the plot of they need to get this car that Hulot's designed to this show in Amsterdam. And things go wrong along the way on the highway. And like you said, it's still fun. It's still good. I don't like it nearly as much as I like the other Hulot movies. I think it loses a lot of the charm that those have. I don't think you get as much of a chance to get to know the background characters because you're constantly on the move in this one.
It's less poetic. This could almost be like a Chevy Chase movie from like the late 70s versus like a movie like Mon Oncle, which is obviously much more French. This feels much more just like not a generic comedy, but just a more of a by the numbers approach.
There's still social commentary. Like he takes breaks to like just look at people picking their noses in cars, saying like, oh, this is what people do. And it's true, and it's funny, and it's charming. And I think the most charming thing in this movie is just seeing the car that Hulot designed and all the absurdity that he's put into it. It's like, you know what, it's a pretty cool car. I'd drive that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's got some of his very Keaton-esque kind of like sight gags when he's sitting in kind of the half car and it flips upside down and then flips back up over again. I mean, this is stuff that I feel like Keaton would have adored to do, or at least attempted to do, because it's, you know, you're combining your like, you know, illusion with like the car looking like it's complete from one side, but you also got the physical side of actually having like, you know, endure the flips and that sort of thing. And it's incredible how like, I don't know what he did to stay in shape, but he seems to have remained a pretty rugged, fit, resilient individual well into his 60s, because some of that shit looks straight up dangerous. I'm surprised he didn't get hurt or crippled doing some of these things.
And I don't think he's using stunt doubles. I'm pretty sure he climbed a tree and is hanging by like ivy in that movie.
Doesn't he use some doubles in Playtime though, and some of those early sequences in the building? I thought I read somewhere or heard in an interview that he does use some physical doubles that he was directing, but they're wearing the Monsieur Hulot gear.
Oh, I didn't read that. I wouldn't be surprised because on
YouTube there are a couple of interviews with him. One's like 30 minutes long, and I would have to confirm. I mean, I have to check just to be 100%, because I don't know why this would have popped in my head otherwise, but I'm 99.9% sure that at least in some of the early sequences in Playtime, he does use not a stunt double, just a double, because he wanted to be orchestrating from the director's chair some of the action that was taking place.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, all you need is a tall person who can move, but I guess the way he moves, that kind of like hunched over, kind of like ready for action kind of stance that he's got is very signature. So you wouldn't necessarily want to use it too much. But yeah, but in Traffic, it's definitely him on screen for the majority of the movie. But my favorite part is when he's dealing with those mechanics and he's like outside like looking for like a part or a block of wood, and he steps on a block of wood with a nail, and he kind of pulls it out of his foot, and he kind of like limps back in, but it's kind of this funny walk as he's walking in. The guy kind of sees, I can't remember the throwaway line the engineer has, but he basically says like, "Oh, that's no problem. Like, it's no big deal that you stepped on a nail or something like that." But he just kind of just ignores it entirely. And during the scene is when you have that great bit with the dog, where this dog is basically like a force of nature. It's kind of like pinning this one person down, and Hulo's kind of looking through the window and seeing it and kind of wondering what's happening. But I don't know why there's not a lot of story happening, but I just found myself charmed by the action as it was unfolding.
Yeah. They're all charming. Like you said, they're not all laugh out loud funny, but if you just want an amusing, charming time, you can put on any of these and it'll brighten your mood.
Although the bit with the tree and the couple, that I was laughing out loud. You mentioned at the beginning of the episode where he's hanging upside down in a tree and periodically making these little noises. And there's this guy trying to put the mood in the girl, like, "Oh, come on, like, where are you going? Come inside, la, 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 la." Like, he's like, being the generic, traditional kind of French, French lover. And this girl's just not having any of it. And part of the reason why she's kind of not necessarily being that open to his advances is that Hulo keeps distracting them, making these strange noises from the tree, but they can't quite figure out where these noises are coming from.
And he's almost like, he kind of wants him to see that he's there, but he's also like, don't look at me, don't notice me here.
Yeah, he's kind of embarrassed. Yeah, he's like a bug on a windshield, and he's just kind of like splattered, but he's just hanging upside down in this odd position. But while I was watching that, I was just cackling wildly.
I really love the bit in that, because there's been a big traffic accident, which I guess you could say is like the main set piece of the film, because it's like cars spinning around, cars like doing wheelies or whatever you could call them. There's
one of the most broad comedic bits I've seen him do in his movies, where it's just like when the car's spinning, at that point they're not even that really concerned with like reality anymore. No, it's just like we're just being silly. It's almost like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or something like that at that point.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'm getting distracted because these movies have just so much going on. My brain can't focus on one thing. Then you have, I think, another really funny bit. After all this big traffic accident, then everyone just steps out of their car. They don't ask if anyone else is okay. They're just stretching out like, ooh, just making sure they're okay. And it's just silent. Everyone's stretching. No one's really like acknowledging the fact like, oh, all these cars are broken. Let's just make sure we get our stretches on. But he drives.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, we were talking earlier about how this film seemed to be less ambitious in like scope and scale, but going back to those scenes with all the cars, there are some gorgeous shots of like just endless fields of cars and that sort of thing. So I feel like it does still have some ambitious visual flourishes, just not on the same scale as Playtime.
Yeah, but no, I will agree with that. And you see a lot of like moments where like you see cars being crushed. The cars are just everywhere in this film.
Yeah, I'm not a car buff or a gearhead, but I imagine people who are, just like David Lynch. But I feel like David Lynch is less of a gearhead, more of like a car fetishist. But if you are a car fetishist, this is probably the movie for you of the four.
Yeah. And I'm going to say that if you were to pair this, since I said to pair Playtime with 2 or 3 things I know about her, I'm going to say if you're going to pair Traffic with a Jean-Luc Godard film, pair it with Weekend.
Fuck yeah. No, the opening sequence is a Weekend. Yeah, it seemed like they share a lot of connective tissue. But it's weird how Godard in the late 60s with those movies, Weekend and 2 or 3 things I know about her, it seems to have been the pivot point where he just decided, I'm never going to make an entertaining movie ever again.
That's where he decides like cinema's dead. I hate movies. I hate everything. I hate everyone. Yeah,
it's like this abrupt turning point, and he got really angry and very political. And it's fine if you want to. If you're no longer interested in movies, great. If you're more interested in politics, great. I won't stand in the way of anyone pursuing what interests them. But it's just, I've never seen a filmmaker such a complete abrupt change, because for like the first 7 or 8 years of Godard's films, he dabbles with some politics, but if you look at movies like Contempt and Masculine Feminine and shit like Alphaville, all of a sudden like this like I don't know like this 8-9 year period of arguably one of the best like concentrated rich periods in any filmmaker's career ever just abruptly stops, and then like, the next 15 years are utterly unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any other filmmaker who's had such an abrupt about face after so many years of beloved movies in a row.
Yeah, I can't think of anything like that. It's like he suddenly decided that he hated movies but didn't want to stop making them.
Yeah, which is a really, really strange decision. It's like, just go into politics, become a political activist or revolutionary. Go do whatever it is that you need to do, but please don't make us suffer alongside you.
Don't make me watch Goodbye to Language 3D again.
Yeah, I have not seen it yet. I'm embarrassed when it comes to Godard. I really love his like late 50s to late 60s period, but I've barely seen anything outside of that. I mean, I saw like First Name Carmen from the early 80s, which is basically like a stylistic throwback to his films from the 60s, but in color and with some nudity. But my knowledge of late Godard is utterly non-existent compared to that first 10-year period. Yeah.
The only thing that I've seen him do recently, I've seen Every Man for Himself from the 80s. Is that the one you said? I missed your...
First Name Carmen was the one from the 80s I mentioned.
Got it. I have not seen that one. I've seen Every Man for Himself, and I've seen Goodbye to Language. And Every Man for Himself was okay, but I did not care for Goodbye to Language. I know some people seem to really like it. Not for me.
Yeah, First Name Carmen, even if people don't like it, it's incredibly erotic, and it's shot by Raoul Cotard, and it's got all this sexual stuff. I mean, at one point, not to get too explicit this early in the day, but there's a guy and a girl about to get it on, and they're talking about either him like eating her ass or fucking her in the ass, and he basically says like, "Have you showered yet today?" And she says something to the effect like, "No." No, he says, "Is your ass clean?" She says, "No, it isn't." But like something like "People aren't shit, the world's shit," or something to that effect. But I just remember watching it like, whoa! I was like, this feels like something a conversation Godard might have had last night. But yeah, it's a much more risque film than some of the other films in this period. I mean, obviously, Contempt has some gorgeous nude scenes that were kind of thrown in there, but they're very beautiful and very kind of objectified. This is very detail oriented. But anyway, back to Tati.
Back to
I feel like he never lost his sense of fun, at least in the four films. But what film did he make after Traffic? I think you've seen his sixth and final feature.
I've seen Parade, and Parade, I'm willing to give it another chance. I didn't think it was very great. It was mostly sad because of seeing what he had accomplished, and now he's making this film that's mostly shot on video in Sweden, I believe it was. He does have some scenes shot in 35 millimeter, and the only thing with that is that it takes place at the circus, and he's the circus master, and it's very largely not plot driven. And I think that just by it literally just seems like it's this very specifically filmed circus act. It didn't really work for me.
Do you get the sense that it was like kind of like work for hire where he just needed the money, or is it a film that just didn't come together in spite of his best attempts to make it work?
He might have been very happy with it. I don't see it as too much of a work for hire thing because it's very clearly what he likes, because he does have a fascination with the circus. At the end of Playtime, there's a lot of circus music, a lot of cars driving in circles that kind of feel like a carousel. And again, his first feature film, Jour de Fête, has the fair going on, a lot of carousels in that. So I think he does have a fascination with that. And it does carry through. But I just feel like he had to figure out something he could make on a low budget. Because even Traffic, which is a lower budget than Playtime, probably wasn't a huge financial success, even though he used Hulot again when he probably didn't want to.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad thing, but I'm trying to think of like other French comedic directors and or performers that have carried over. I mean, Tati has to be, in America at least, the most famous French comedian / storyteller. But I'm trying to think of what other contenders. Who the hell in French cinema are the funny people? Obviously, the French people like to laugh like anybody else. But I'm trying to think of I feel like when we study French film, we almost always gravitate toward Renoir and Truffaut and Carnet and Melville. Like, it's like gangster films and dramas and stories about love and that sort of thing, and stories about politics. But I can't really even think of any overt, explicit, like straight up comedies that are part of French cinema history that Americans are kind of drawn to. There've got to be French comedies. I remember like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there's a movie, The Visitors, where it's like Jean Reno is like a knight and he's like traveling through time. And it's kind of silly, kind of broad, but people really loved it. But yeah, it seems like we love British comedy, but French comedy has never really translated that well into America. But maybe because Tati's is so visually oriented, it kind of jumps over the language barrier, because I feel like so much humor can get lost with weird translations.
Mm-hmm. I believe that Akaj et Foles, I'm sure I'm butchering the name of that, the movie that the Birdcage
was based on, yeah.
Yeah, that's a French film, and I'm pretty sure that was pretty popular in America.
True, that's true.
But that's like a very random example. Yeah, I can't think of anyone really. That's a very interesting point.
Because what I was going to ask is like rank the best French comedian / like funny French filmmakers, but I was like, oh, there's Tati and there's Tati and there's Tati, and
that's my answer.
He stands alone atop that mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wonder if that's a cultural thing, or if that's an American ignorance, kind of like innate bias we have, because obviously we know our own comedy. I feel like you can name any decade, and you can name a couple of directors and or performers who kind of define that style from like the 20s or teens even up through now. Like if I asked you to talk about comedy in any decade over the last 100 years, there can be a lot of names that pop up. But when it comes to French cinema, I can't think of fucking any. And
maybe that's just, we need to explore it. We need to
figure
something out.
Yeah. All right. Well, for people who are listening, if you know your French cinema cold, I would appreciate some recommendations and suggestions, because I just feel like either through a bias from distributors or through our own natural biases of our own, we're just drawn to the quote unquote more respectable French cinema. But there's got to be other kind of like lighthearted things out there. Like I'm sure, like, they have like a porn industry, they got an action industry. Like, I mean, they don't probably make as many kind of like escapist entertainment movies as we do, but there's got to be people who kind of thrive in the world of genre entertainment. Like, when Jean-Luc Godard is making movies like Band of Outsiders, which is funny and is really, really cool, it's not a comedy. It's just got moments of humor in it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very good thinking point.
Well, how would you rank Tati overall next to these other great French luminaries? So I feel like starting in the 30s through the 70s, you've got so many just great masters. Even if it's guys like Buñuel, who kind of migrated to France to make a lot of these movies in the late 60s, early 70s. But while Tati was working, many of his peers are arguably some of the greatest filmmakers who've ever lived. How does he rank if you were going to do like top 10 French filmmaker all-time list?
That's a really mean question for you to ask. That's cruel. He's near the top for me because I love his movies. I like, again, 1960 through 1967 Godard. Francois Truffaut is great. I like Henry Georges Clouzot, even though I have not seen nearly enough of his movies. But
I love Clouzot, but I've only seen a handful. Like Wages of Fear, Diabolique.
Wages of Fear is great.
Those movies are fucking unbelievable. And of course, like the Unfinished Inferno, which has like all this great footage of Romy Schneider, which they made a documentary about, or it's like L'Enfer, however you pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, apparently Henry Georges Clouzot was like commercially a wildly successful filmmaker. So maybe he was considered kind of the French mainstream that we were trying to think of. Gotcha.
He was one of the people that the French New Wave like hated. Like, no, this is not how you make movies, and they kind of killed his career a little bit.
Wow, because I know like, he basically had like carte blanche to do whatever the hell he wanted. But like Wages of Fear, to this day, 60 years later, is literally one of those movies that'll have you chewing on the edge of your carpet from the tension while watching it.
Yeah, no, that one's great. Again, Godard. I'm trying to think. Oh, who's the guy that did Eyes Without a Face?
Georges Franju.
Franju. Yeah. I like him. I've only seen Eyes Without a Face and Judex, but I think those are both great. Like you said, Buñuel's French period, I think that's his best period of filmmaking, and I think those are some of my favorite movies.
Well, there are a lot of people that would disagree. I don't know what his best period was because his best period, he lasted for 50 years. But if you talk to people from Mexico, they're like, oh, his Mexican movies are the best. You talk to people from Spain, oh, his Spanish period was the best. And you talk to French, oh, his French period is the best. The reality is Buñuel had a couple of really, really good periods in a couple of different countries, and they're all worth exploring. But I perhaps lean toward his French period because they're just so beautifully shot, and they star Captain Villeneuve and all these wonderful actors and everything. So it's very easy if you're going to introduce someone to Buñuel, starting with like The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie or That Obscure Object of Desire or Belle de Jour. Those are very easy kind of like gateway points into Buñuel's world.
Agreed, definitely.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of, in terms of, like, I'm so new to Tati that I'm very hesitant to kind of rank him next to or amidst all these other people because he just was making such wildly different movies. But if someone wanted to make a top 5 or top 10 French filmmaker list and include him in the mix, I will not argue that. I mean, because I feel like I would have my own list. So it would obviously include Noir, it would obviously include Godard, it would include Clouseau and Carnet. But if I made a top 10 French filmmaker list, Tati would definitely be on it. But like I said, I'm still, my experience watching these movies is still kind of marinating in my head. And like I said, I think I did a huge disservice to them watching them essentially binge. I think I always do this when I do episodes with you. I tend to binge watch shitloads of movies all at once, as opposed to.
I keep really suggesting let's watch all of Giallo.
Yeah, let's watch all of the Hollywood 1930s pre-code films. Like, oh, that's like 200 movies. So, but yeah, we'll have to find, I guess, a more focused episode where it's just like 1 or 2 movies where we can really like go into depth as opposed to breadth. Because I feel like we've done 2 episodes so far that are very concerned with breadth over depth. But obviously, Conjuring 2, we got to focus on a specific movie. But I did enjoy finally. He's like checking off this box, but Tati's been one of my massive blind spots for like 20 years, and so many people love his movies, and Criterion obviously keeps reissuing his movies, and it was long overdue for me to get exposed to the great man's work.
And just real quick, I know you still have Jour de Fête and Parade to watch, but if you watch those and still need more Tati, this is what I've been kind of trying to look up on my phone, and this is going to be an answer to something of another kind of protege, I guess you could say, of Tati, a more recent one. Have you seen the animated film The Triplets of Belleville?
I have. I love it.
Have you seen that director whose name I cannot pronounce, Sylvain Chomet? Have you seen his follow-up film, The Illusionist?
I have not, and here it kicks ass.
That is a Tati script.
Interesting.
He wrote a script right after he made Mon Uncle and never got it produced. And Sylvain Chomet, however you say his name, got the rights to it and animated it. And the main character in that is a caricature of Jacques Tati.
Very cool. I love that. So then earlier when I was asking who are the spiritual successors to Tati,
that is one of my answers.
There is the man. There's the guy.
And Triplets of Belleville. Triplets of Belleville does have footage from Jour de Fête in it, where they're watching people on bicycles, and it's taken from that film. So he's
animation. I feel like, the world of animation, that's probably the best medium for capturing what his style was like, because I feel like no one's ever going to do in live action what he did, but you could do a cool approximation. So maybe that is the closest stylistic kind of relative to his films is guys like Tex Avery and Max and Dave Fleischer and all these, like, because so many of the great animators from the 30s and 40s, and now with this new guy who did Triplets of Belleville, those visual gags in their films are very, very close, kind of like cousins or stepbrothers and stepsisters to the Tati style. And so maybe that's why we were having such a hard time finding close comparisons to make, because we were just looking at the wrong medium. It's not live action. Animation.
It's animation.
Yeah.
They are live action cartoons.
Yeah. They feel very people say cartoonish sometimes as a criticism, but I've made animation, so I don't consider it a criticism. But his films are very cartoonish in tone in the most respectful way, of the most, in terms of the most respectful use of that word. I mean, cartoonish as like the highest possible praise.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, what's going to be our next big episode? I feel like I know you watch a shitload of stuff. I know you're a big art film guy, and we've covered kind of a comedy, and we've covered horror, kind of like the two opposite ends of the spectrum. But who are your major like 3, 4, 5 like filmmakers and or topics that you're just like, my life is not complete until I get to make my case on X?
All right. Well, my favorite filmmaker of all time, I think we've already talked about this, is Bergman, who again is in a complete different direction from all those things. The closest that you could possibly say there is horror. Then Stanley Kubrick. Then Wes Anderson, probably.
Interesting.
Yeah. Then probably Buñuel and David Lynch. So
all great guys.
Anything you want to talk about there. And I'm also going to pitch to you right now, since I know that you love animation, if you ever want to do a Triplets of Belleville Illusionist double feature episode,
fuck yeah,
that could be kind of like the sequel to the Tati episode.
That would be awesome. And also, I haven't seen Triplets of Belleville since they came out in the theater, which was what, like 2003 or 4? I mean, it has to. I think it's over 10 years since that movie came out.
Yeah, it's over 10 years.
Yeah, so it's I'm long overdue in revisiting. I just remember that movie has these sequences with this fucking dog that are some of the funniest things that I've ever seen. Like the dog's in a dream, and he's like going around this giant dog bowl, and like the way he eats when they put like the bowl on the floor, and he'll kind of shove it up against the wall. But yeah, those are Tati gags in that movie. Like, they feel so similar in tone and everything. So yeah, high five to Davey E for making that connection before the episode had run its course, because yeah, they just have so much common ground thematically and style and tone and that sort of thing. But yeah, I really, really love Triplets of Belleville. I remember a couple of my friends and I got blazing high to the point where we couldn't even see straight, much less like find our way into the theater. But somehow we ended up in our seats. And when it ended, we were like, that movie's way too short. I think it was like 75 or 80 minutes. So we could sit here for 2 more hours just watching more of that.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, where can folks find you online if they want to talk more Tati or Buñuel or Wes Anderson or Bergman or any of these great luminaries that you are preoccupied with?
If you want to talk to me about anything film-wise, especially those things, I'm on Twitter at Cinema versus Dave, and that's Cinema VS Dave. And I also have a blog that I update infrequently. Cinema versus is it WordPress? I should remember this by now. It's a WordPress.
I think you said the same thing on the last episode. I should know.
I should know this. It's Cinema Verse. Wait, no, yeah. Cinema Versus, and that's versus spelled out, .wordpress.com. Gotcha. And if you just follow me on Twitter, I have the link there. So just follow me on Twitter.
Now, have you been feeling the itch at all to post some more stuff to your YouTube channel? Because I know obviously you got some short films there.
I do have some short films there. That's the thing. I'm at that point right now where my ideas are too expensive to just put out one after another. I definitely have tons of things that I wish I could be making, but I do need that drive. I need to come up with that final thing that's like, all right, I'm going to make this. I'm going to do a Kickstarter. I'm going to get it done. So when I get that idea, I'll let you know.
So do you have any ideas percolating right now where you've got kind of the itch, or is it a couple that are kind of lobbying for position?
My biggest issue is that most of my ideas that I have in my head right now are more so feature length.
Gotcha. So it's like you just like write like a spec script and like shop it around and that sort of thing.
Exactly. But I do like to do short film writing competitions. And the one that I wrote most recently a couple weekends ago, I kind of liked. It was a horror short. So I'm gonna spend some time with that script and see if it's worth making.
Very cool. Excellent. Well, I used to read scripts professionally as a young buck in LA for Phoenix Pictures. There's a couple of years where my sole source of income was writing coverage on screenplays and books. And there's no faster way to fall out of love with the movie business than reading a couple screenplays and or books a day that are being submitted to be made into movies, because like people make fun of movies that, movies are so terrible these days, blah, blah, blah. Like, no matter what you might think of the movie industry as it stands, it is just an ocean of masterpieces compared to the screenplays out there that are being in competition to be made into those shitty movies. Because for every shitty movie that gets made, there's 100 way shittier movies that might have been made if somebody greenlit the wrong film. So we've got it lucky because people have no idea just how bad things could be if those screenplays ever made it to the screen.
It is really hard to write a screenplay, and it's next to impossible to write a good one.
Yes.
I've never been in the position where I'm reading all these spec scripts, but I have certainly seen my fair share of not very well written things online. And it's anytime anyone gets anything accomplished, it's really like, good for you, great for you. That's fantastic.
The greatest illusion or misconception a lot of young film enthusiasts cling to is the idea that recognizing a good movie or appreciating a good movie immediately equates to the ability to write and or make a great movie. Two very different skill sets. One is very passive and just requires a little taste and a little attention span. The other requires creativity, skill, technique, imagination, talent, all that good stuff. So yeah, it's two totally different universes, and they're not necessarily correlated, because there are plenty of great filmmakers out there who don't know a goddamn thing about film history. And there are plenty of people out there who know a lot about film history, but don't know a fucking thing about making movies. Yeah. So it's, I know some people get disappointed when their heroes don't have a great knowledge of film. But there are guys like Tarantino and Peter Bogdanovich and Martin Scorsese who are film dorks, first and foremost. But they're just as many directors, if not more so, who are great filmmakers who just don't watch a lot of movies. I know Bergman was into movies and watched them here and there, but it's not like he wrote a lot of books about my top 100 favorite movies of the 1960s and things like that. It's
far more into theater.
Yeah, it's a different discipline entirely. So it's but I feel like there are a lot of people out there who just think that by watching a lot of movies somehow that's going to eventually turn them into a great director, and it's just not necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
I've tried my hand at writing screenplays, and I've very rapidly realized I did one adaptation of a novel when I was working at Phoenix Pictures, because they were having a hard time nailing the adaptation, and I kept writing bad coverage of all the attempts, and book's great. All three versions so far of the screenplay have sucked balls, and finally, well, if you know so much, why don't you try it? And I was like, I'll call your bluff. I'm going to do it. And I wrote a pretty boring, uninspired adaptation of the book that also got turned down. So it's much harder than it looks.
Oh yeah.
Well, for people who like this podcast, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes, or Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, or Google Play Music. And if you're watching this on video, please subscribe to the channel and all that good stuff. And write some comments. And if you want to talk to me on Twitter, you can do so at Colbrax, or you can do so at WrongReel. And but Dave, I just want to thank you so much for carving out time on your Saturday to participate on the podcast, but more importantly, introducing me to the work of a really, really cool director, because like I said, I was a total blank slate on Tati until a couple days ago. So I'm taking my first step into that world. So thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Excellent. Well, guys, we'll have Dave back on in the very near future, but it's time for me to start getting prepared for UFC 200 commentary and movie freak. I don't know. I'm not quite sure on the title what it's going to be yet, but it's going to be an interesting episode. So thanks so much for listening, and catch y'all soon.